Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sorting Hat Podcast, the show where everything and anything can and will be sorted. I, as always, am your host, Michael Barryte, joined by my co-host, Brice.
I'm so sorry. Can I possibly get that intro gluten-free?
Oh, why is that?
I am definitely have celiacs. I saw it on television and it sounded perfect.
Did you read that WebMD?
I did get diagnosed by WebMD. Thank you.
The basic conceit of the show is that we are joined by a fan or expert on a topic, and then we sort things within that topic into the various houses of Hogwarts. Today, we are joined by Nicky Urban, comedian actor of the Los Angeles area, who's on the sketch team Fembot PhD and also a part of Bacchus, with which Reed participates in. Nicky, welcome to the program.
Hello, it is a pleasure to be here.
And today, we are going to be sorting some autoimmune diseases.
Woohoo!
Yeah. Not for no reason. Nikki actually has one, lives with one.
What? I do too.
Ooh,
Yeah,
cool.
we'll swap autoimmune tales. We'll start with you though, because you're the guest. Nikki, what's your autoimmune disease?
What's your autoimmune disease? That's not a very good game show chant.
I have Hashimoto's disease. It's Hashimoto's thyroiditis.
Mm-hmm.
It's a disease where my body attacks my thyroid, which is
no.
responsible for your entire metabolic system.
Gotcha. We'll dive into that a little bit more. It is also worth noting before we get into any real, true, honest to goodness sorting, Nikki, you are a Hufflepuff.
I'm a Hufflepuff.
Reed is also a Hufflepuff.
Yo.
I am a Ravenclaw. And so just as far as our sorting bias is concerned, that's what you need to know.
Yeah. Oh, and to back up for if you're like, what is an autoimmune disease? It's pretty much like what it sounds like. It's like you have a condition that your body usually would be able to handle, right? But like you just have symptoms like that your immune system reacts weirdly to, right?
Your immune system has decided that your own body is the enemy. And so
Gotcha.
it attacks it in a weird way, resulting in all sorts of strange things. So, for example, Nikki cited that her thyroid does fun things, correct?
Yes.
In my case, I have ulcerative colitis like Crohn's disease, which is an IBD, an irritated bowel disease. Not to be confused with IBS, although it's of a similar nature. And so in that case, my colon and large intestine, I believe, have some fun flare-ups because my body just decided like that's what's going to happen.
Oh.
So it's pretty unpleasant, or it was. Now I'm actually in a state of remission, which is very nice.
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah, but I was diagnosed like back in 8th grade when that it was just like not fun. But we're not actually going to be sorting ulcerative colitis like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease because it's messy stuff. We're going to be sorting the stuff that you know the most about, Nikki.
I just want to say, first of all, congratulations on your butt working again.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Got a good butt.
I mean, it's more than just the butt, but I'm, making sure that I'm not getting colon cancer or anything like that.
I agree that you should be doing that.
Yeah. So, get a colonoscopy every 2 to 3 years, looking clean. Everything's good. It's fun. But Nikki, let's start with Hashimoto's disease because that's what you've got. You're rocking. Tell us everything.
Okay. Hashimoto's disease. So it's so your thyroid is responsible for basically the metabolism in your entire body, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of like your energy is essentially goes through your thyroid. So it takes hormones, and it's all tied to your pituitary glands and things like that, and your adrenal glands. And so, your thyroid takes, the hormones that your body is producing them and turns them into like, other hormones. So what Hashimoto's does is it looks at the thyroid and the thyroid tissue and the hormones that it secretes and goes like, this looks like a foreign invader, and it attacks it. And you can get what's called a goiter. So it's like basically where your thyroid becomes enlarged and you can physically see it. So
so it is a large lump in the neck.
Yeah, it's basically a large lump in the neck.
Because if you didn't know where your thyroid gland was, it's in your neck.
Yeah, it looks like an Adam's apple
not
when
in
it's
the thigh.
enlarged.
No.
Yeah.
Different spelling of thigh.
I wouldn't know that. Not a spelling man.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, so you run the risk of getting a goiter.
You run the risk of getting a goiter, but that's not like the big deal. Like the biggest thing is the fact that your thyroid stops functioning because it's under attack. And so it's not producing the hormones that it needs basically for your metabolism. So in people with untreated Hashimoto's or just hypothyroidism in general, which is different, it's different. People can have hypothyroidism where your thyroid isn't functioning. And that's one thing. And that's just, okay, your thyroid's not really functioning properly. But Hashimoto's is different because it's not only that your thyroid isn't functioning, but your body is actively trying to destroy it.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, and it's actively like, this thing is bad. Let's send, white blood cells over here and And what happens when your body is under attack, it's just like any sort of infection. Like if you are sick and your body's trying to fight off foreign invaders, it's going to feel like crap. So it's essentially that all the time. So if you're feeling inflamed or if you're feeling like stressed out, your body will react to that.
Your body's literally in a civil war with itself.
Oh, exactly. I say all the time that I'm suicidal. And it's not me. It's not my brain. It's my body is suicidal. It's trying to kill myself all the time.
You've just got like rogue Osmosis Joneses running through you.
Yeah, exactly.
What are some other symptoms that people might experience?
The biggest thing is like tiredness, fatigue. You get something called brain fog where you just feel real dumb. It's like
That's the technical definition.
Yeah. It's in Webster's. You just real dumb. Like right now. Sometimes it's hard for me when I'm having a flare up. Sometimes it's hard for me to like recall things, remember words or names, like places. Like I'll have conversations with people, and then they'll be like, "Oh, remember you said this?" And like,
that's really interesting. I didn't know that would be associated with like a thyroid condition.
Yeah, when you get real dumb, because everything's just all of your organs are moving slower. You get cold hands and feet, body aches, just like physical things like your stomach, just like a lot of stomach issues, bloating, pale. Like the biggest thing that people notice is like pale, puffy face. And for me, it was I couldn't lose. When I was diagnosed at 24 years old, 22. I couldn't lose weight, and I had all this facial hair, and I was like, maybe it's polycystic ovarian syndrome, and then the doctor figured out it was this instead.
Oh, wow.
Which is shitty.
So it sounds like a lot can sort of result out of this one singular, like from Hashimoto's, it's almost seems a little tricky to diagnose just in the fact that it conveys so many different outward traits.
Yeah. It's a big factor in why it's severely underdiagnosed, and people like it generally tends to be a lot of females who have to deal with this.
Apparently women and femmes are 7 times more likely to get an autoimmune disease like this one than men are.
Yeah, and I have some theories about that too.
Oh, really?
There are lots of theories.
All right, let's put on those tinfoil hats. What's the
I'm
theories?
always ready for conspiracy.
Autoimmune diseases in general. If you think about it, like your body is suspecting that something. Your body is suspecting something in your body is not right, and usually, you know what? That's gonna come because I have this theory that it's because you can't attack what's happening on the outside, like the things that are happening to you in your actual life. So it's like your body turns on itself. And like it's sort of just like how women and femmes generally tend to tend to like hurt themselves when somebody else is hurting them.
So like it's like internalized.
Yeah, it's like
interesting theory.
Yeah, it's like your body's internal way of just trying to like cope or express itself. So I've like in the past couple years, I've really learned to listen to my body and be like, okay, if something doesn't feel right with my body, something's probably not right in my life. And like, there's probably something that I need to take more responsibility for, take control of, where it's like, this is a thing that isn't healthy. So whether it's like a relationship with somebody or just like what I'm doing. So it's, I don't know, it's a good marker for me to be like, hey, pay attention. What's happening?
It's your barometer.
Yeah, it's my barometer.
So how do we feel that we sort Hashimoto's?
Well, let's see here. It was also first recognized, wasn't it like in the 50s?
In the 50s.
So it has that sort of background. Affects women. Is a goiter in the neck. And so once you start being treated, is it pretty easy to manage, or is it one of the ones, or is it pretty difficult to manage? Like how is it treated?
That's another factor too. Doctors typically just treat it with a pill, Synthroid, levothyroxine. There's a couple. That's the main one.
Yeah.
And they just a lot of times they'll just be like, well, try this pill. We'll test you in 6 months, see where see your blood tests, see where your levels are at. But with Hashimoto's, it's kind of hard because it is an autoimmune disease. So it's not just about replacing your thyroid hormone that you're not getting. It's also about treating what it is that's inside of you, like that's causing it in the first place.
There is a part of me that I feel, especially in the case of like autoimmune as an umbrella, I think we'll find ourselves leaning towards Gryffindor, just based out of the fact that it is like a more brash and brazen just concept. So something to keep in the back of our brains as we're sorting. That said, I do think of this set, this one might be the most clear-cut Gryffindor of the, like, it doesn't, I don't feel that it necessarily possesses many of the other traits that would make it seem more Hufflepuff in nature or Ravenclaw. Maybe Slytherin, but it just seems more just across the board destructive.
Yeah.
And seemingly like affecting people in very different ways, which I think, as Gryffindor is something of a catch-all house for like looking at least to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, all of whom very easily could be sorted into any of these other houses, that perhaps Hashimoto's falls in a similar camp.
Yeah, I would say so.
Shall we then flip to the other side of the coin, at least as we were discussing off mic? And I believe Graves' disease, you had stated, Nicky, is sort of the yang to Hashimoto's yin, as it were.
Yeah. Graves' disease affects you in a way that makes you more hyperthyroid. So a lot of times people with Graves' disease, it's like their body ends up producing too much thyroid hormone, and then you'll end up being like very skinny and like heart palpitations, losing hair, things like that.
So it is it upping your overall metabolic rate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, your metabolism like speeds up.
Yeah, other things that can be included are heat sensitivity, weight loss, changes to your menstrual cycle, erectile dysfunction, and like your libido just gets like killed. You can even have other like the more like, this worrisome ones, like bulging eyes and thick red skin, usually on the shins or tops of the feet.
Yeah, it's almost like your body's trying to like come out of itself, like everything's moving so fast. Like,
weird. So all right, that strikes me as, I mean, I feel like we just bullet trained through what Graves' disease is. If I did have to try to sort this one, okay, it seems like it's got a hyperactivity to it. Again, I don't want to just default to Gryffindor. So I'm wondering if there's something about it that might make it lean in a different direction. Is there anything that you're finding, Reed, or you're feeling on this?
So this definitely seems like it's like speeding the whole train up sort of thing. It's like a rushed sort of condition, and the fact that it like takes away your ability to enjoy like sexuality, that it can affect your ability to like your fertility and stuff. I would say I would say that's probably like a Slytherin, right? Because it's just like it like takes away like a lot of your ability to enjoy anything, especially if you're just like uncomfortable all the time.
I actually think, based on what you're saying, it might make it more of a Ravenclaw.
Oh, why do you say that?
That's what I was thinking.
Because Ravenclaw, like if we look to characters, granted we don't customarily sort characters, but Spock is like the most, like the apex of Ravenclaw,
right?
In that it's just data, it's stripping emotion out of it, and if you are taking sexuality, and Graves' disease seems to strip that away somewhat, with lowered libido, all sorts of arousal issues, and everything that we're describing as far as fertility is concerned, that seems to defeminize, emasculate accordingly, so that we are just more asexual in nature, which might not to say that every Ravenclaw is more asexual, but I think the passion in a more physical sense is sometimes lacking with a Ravenclaw. And so perhaps for that very reason, we might view Graves' disease through that proper lens.
Yeah, I would say that makes sense to me. What about you, Nikki?
I'd agree with Ravenclaw. There's also the speed aspect of it. There's something about like when I think of a Ravenclaw, I think of that quick wit, that
like efficiency.
Efficiency. So it's sort of like your body's like, okay, we're moving through all this real fast.
If just so I can be very thorough with this educational portion of the show, if you suspect that you might have it and you're like, what would be ahead of me for this? You'll probably take sort of medications, but it can go all the way up to like having your thyroid removed or even having radiation therapy. So that's what that is.
Let's shift gears to lupus. What do we got going on with lupus, Nikki?
First of all, my mom has lupus.
Okay.
Yeah. She it sucks.
Did she have it like if it's not too personal, did she have it like the entire time like while you were growing up, or did she develop it later?
She developed it later. Something that one cool thing, an interesting thing about autoimmune diseases is like you can be genetically predisposed to them, of course, but they can just happen out of nowhere as like in reaction to a traumatic event, or like even something like a car crash can trigger an autoimmune disease that you didn't have there before.
Whoa.
Yeah, my ulcerative colitis was supposedly triggered by ibuprofen, just an intake of ibuprofen, and I'm now told to stay away from it, even though Ashkenazi Jews and like Eastern European Caucasians are somewhat more predisposed in just from genetic makeup to be sort of coming up with those sorts of bowel disease.
So it was kind of like this was like a sleeper agent sort of thing that like it lived inside the possibility, but it got unlocked by the ibuprofen.
Apparently, yeah.
Okay.
And there's no like 100%. They're just like, hey, you took that a while ago, and then like this started happening. So maybe don't. So like,
it's like it's like the less fun version of like an action movie.
It's really just whenever I have a headache, I'm not seeking out aspirin, and it's Tylenol exclusively, which is bad for my liver. But,
yeah, that's acetaminophen. So if you're like, I might have some of these symptoms.
Yeah, but whenever I go in and they're like, "Are you allergic?" I'm like, "I'm not allergic. I'm just supposed to avoid ibuprofen." But lupus.
What are some of the symptoms?
Sensitivity to the sun. That's like the biggest thing people usually see. My mom actually doesn't have this, but a lot of people with lupus have where it looks like almost like a rash along your like cheeks and nose, where it like a butterfly.
Like, is it kind of like rosacea?
It's kind of like that, but it's not on like the full cheeks. It's just like sort of along
like your T-zone.
Yeah, the T-zone, like under the eyes.
Oh, and under the eyes? Okay.
Yeah, like right there. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to
Nikki,
you can't see this.
Realizing that podcasts are a visual medium was rubbing her face and be like, right here.
Right here.
So that should have been clear to everyone listening.
Yeah. Okay, so it's mostly just so does that
Okay, so that's what mostly like how people will be able to tell is by that. But it's like essentially like a full on all over bodily disease where like you feel sick all the time. Your body, it's like your whole body. It's like your tissues. And
the reaction is to sunlight. That's what triggers it.
It is for some people, but otherwise it's just a typical autoimmune disease. I'm actually not sure what triggers it. I don't think doctors even really know.
Because I would then say if sunlight is the trigger, and that then would mean that those who have lupus are naturally trying to avoid sunlight, which would then put them at risk for a vitamin D deficiency. So then they'd probably have to be taking supplements. Like I know just working as an editor for as long as both Reed and I have.
Right.
Do you take vitamin D supplements?
I probably should.
You probably, yes.
My ass never sees the sun.
Yeah, most people probably should.
Yeah, I mean, with more and more technology just pulling us exclusively indoors or just being told like, the world is on fire, so stay inside, you should probably be taking some vitamin D. Obviously, when you go in and see your general physician, if they happen to note that, it costs like $10 for a pill of or 200 pills or something like that. So just do it. You'll be fine. You'll be set for like most of the year.
Yeah, usually it's just affecting so many different parts of your body too. Like you'll have like the rash and like maybe the lesions on like in the nose and the mouth, but you'll also have like joint
this
pain
results
and stuff,
in
right?
lesions.
Yeah, because it's basically your body, your whole body is just like every part
the
of it's
tissue
just like,
in your body. It's
like an inflammation disease, right?
Yeah, it's inflammatory. Literally all of your system functions. So
gotcha. So everything, but every external part of you. No, because you also said joint pain. So it's both an internal and external sort of symptoms that reveal themselves.
Yeah, it can even like a lot of these autoimmune diseases, as I was reading up, can even just like result in like hair loss or hair growth, depending on because like just everything's just like getting activated in some way, right? What do people like your mom like have to do for treatment on that with this disease?
Well, my mom's on disability now because of it. She's also got mixed connective tissue disease, which is so on top of having lupus, where her body is attacking her tissues. She's also got where her joints and her tissues don't always don't connect the way they're supposed to. Man. So she's actually basically it's just pain management at this point where I mean truthfully she should be doing things like drinking more water and there are things that people can do with an autoimmune disease to make the symptoms better, to make the flare-ups not as bad, but at the end of the day there's really only pain management for a lot of patients, like they're too far gone. So my mom actually has a morphine pump. They installed a pump in her back, in her spinal cord, that pumps like just tiny little bits of morphine into her bloodstream, like on a consistent basis. But it's gotten her off a lot of her bad pills, like opioids and stuff like that.
Oh, good.
So it's it's sounds scary where you're like, oh, it's a morphine pump, but there's so little morphine because it's going directly into her spinal cord. So that's all she can do is just
At least she's avoiding the opioid epidemic in favor of morphine. I'm scared by that as just like a general, like anytime that you're administering on a regular basis any sort of painkiller. But
Yeah.
I'd argue morphine's better than opioids.
Not my place to say.
Yeah.
No. I figure, like, I did look straight at Reed when I
looked me dead in the eyes and was like, Reed, you need to make a decision. Which of these drugs is worse for you?
Pick a train. Which one are you? Which hill are you dying on?
Did y'all know an interesting thing about lupus and why it got the word lupus? Which sounds like wolf, is back in olden days. They thought that you would get lupus from a wolf attack. They thought it was like a wolf bite on your face if you got it.
I was hoping that this was related in some way to werewolfism.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily if it has like straight up like werewolf connotations, but most things with the supernatural, especially if a woman was afflicted, was almost always given some sort of supernatural paranormal explanation for it existing.
And then they periodically were like, all right, we got to load this silver bullet into this revolver.
Exactly.
We're going to cure your lupus.
Yeah.
And then it was just unpleasant.
Yeah, but instead just needed vitamin D, not a silver bullet.
No. How are we feeling as far as sorting goes? Or are there other little factoids that we should know about lupus before we start sorting?
The only things that I can think of is, again, women are like exponentially more likely to get it than men. Usually you have to be like a childbearing age, it says. And then
that is really interesting. So there's a puberty component that might trigger lupus.
Yeah, because usually you get it like between the ages of starting after like the age of 15, right? And then also another thing you'd want to know is if you are of African, Caribbean, or Chinese descent, you have a higher risk than people who are white.
That is very interesting and a wide geographic spread.
Interesting.
That's an interesting pull that you're like Chinese and what you said, Afro-Caribbean?
African, Caribbean, or Chinese people have.
That's like that. I mean, if you're looking at a map, that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But not like India or.
I don't know, dude. This is just the stuff that I can pull from the internet with my basic community college science background.
That's fair. That's fair. So then, okay, so there's some degree of region locking. It seems to have a fem bent to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's solar reactive.
Mm-hmm. I guess I would maybe for the exclusivity of it, that it's like more likely to affect a very certain demographic, maybe Slytherin.
Mm-hmm.
And also because like, unlike also like Slytherins, people tend to underestimate them. And I think that this is a condition that people definitely don't. It's like, it feels like one of those like in like what they call like invisible disabilities, where like oftentimes people will be struggling quite a bit, but they don't look like it, and so people can really be unsympathetic.
Yeah.
Which I guess would probably account for a lot of autoimmune diseases.
Right.
But I feel like the ones that affect women tend to be dismissed a lot more often.
I'm not like leaning in any one direction or not. And I'm the one thing that I am like seeking now, like just mentally sort of the cogs are going of like, what is it that about a autoimmune disease that would make it a Hufflepuff? But I don't think necessarily that lupus happens to tick any of the necessary boxes for that. And sometimes ruling out something helps us at least hone in. So I'm willing to say Slytherin on that.
Oh, sure. Okay. And what do you think, Nikki?
I'd say Slytherin too.
All right, hell yeah.
Let's shift gears to type 1 diabetes.
Oh, snap.
What can you tell us about type 1 diabetes? This is obviously attacking insulin producing, correct?
Yeah, that'd be your pancreas, right?
Yeah, your pancreas doesn't produce insulin or doesn't produce enough insulin to convert your sugars into energy. Or or not to convert energy. Yeah.
Now, what's the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes? Because there's obviously a distinction between the two of them, and one of them is more likely to arise in children than adults. Is that correct?
Well, type 1 is the one that is usually like genetically
you're predisposed.
Yeah.
Whereas like type 2 is one that I believe, and someone can let me know, is more often than type 1 diabetes to be onset later in life, and sometimes through like just like your circumstances regarding like weight.
So
and
type
age.
2 is the one that if it's like, oh, they exclusively ate this, the diet happened to dictate that, as opposed to that is.
And then I know just from personal experience, like both of my grandparents had it, and they both were diagnosed when they were in their 40s.
With type 2?
Yeah, with type 2.
So that's interesting, because in the case of diabetes, then you've actually got a nature versus nurture situation. Nature being type 1 and nurture being type 2.
Yeah.
But that being said, they say that type 2 diabetes in children is rising. So it's definitely a concern, and probably, I don't know, might make it more difficult to like see the differences if you're not a medical professional.
But okay, so with type 1 diabetes, are there any like I guess what are the symptoms that sort of make it different between the two? Because I know next to nothing about diabetes. I have two friends who had it, and my grandmother did.
And like, again, this is just me working off of the basic knowledge that I had growing up with people who were affected. I think, in overgeneralized terms, a person might be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Their body type might be more of like the average to overweight range. Whereas with type 1 diabetes, a common way that they figure out, like especially in children, is if they can't gain weight, if they're underweight, if anything. So it definitely, like a lot of these other autoimmune diseases, really affects the metabolic rate.
Yeah, because if your body's not turning like sugars into energy, it's turning your fat into energy instead. So that's like a good test for kids.
I remember I remember in the Babysitter's Club books that I read as a small boy. One of the characters actually got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Her name was Stacy, and the symptoms that she experienced. I love when books do this, when young adult books like introduce these things through their character discovering it. The way that her doctor finally knew was she was peeing all the time. She was hungry all the time. And like her vision was getting blurry. And I think those are like the common ways that people are like, oh, we need to go see a doctor about this. Is like if your child is like bedwetting past the age that they typically would have started, like that would have started to wane.
Yeah, the peeing all the time. And it's not just pee that you're peeing out. It's like you're peeing out ketones, which is like fat, basically, like the fat in your body. So that's like a way that they can test it, especially for like, young people. It's like, it's not just, it's not just testing the blood and seeing where the blood sugar's at. It's also testing the urine to see if you're peeing out ketones. So for somebody with type 2 diabetes, that's usually like a telling sign of if they need to have insulin replacement. Is they'll test you can go in what's called ketoacidosis, and it's essentially like your body you've been taking in so much sugar that like just overloading your body with like sugar and carbohydrates, and your pancreas eventually gets like overwhelmed and like stops producing insulin or doesn't produce enough insulin, or like not at the right times. It's just so like overworked all the time from the stress you're putting on it, that it like that's a way for them to tell if you're like in a really bad spot and need some insulin, is if you have ketones in your urine.
The complications from this are like, I don't think people realize like how vital the pancreas is to the body, because when you have complications from it, it can be they anywhere from like sluggishness to those other symptoms I described, all the way to some of the scariest moments in my childhood were when my grandparents would have like a lapse in treating themselves properly.
Ooh.
My grandmother has on multiple occasions gone into what are called diabetic comas,
Mm-hmm.
which is onset by a really bad bout of like having your blood sugar out of whack.
Yeah.
Other things like if untreated, you can get heart disease, you can have strokes, you can have kidney failure, you can have foot ulcers. Like people lose their feet.
Yeah, that's the one that I remember learning about pretty young and was like, diabetes can result in you needing to have your feet amputated? That's crazy.
Can I tell you guys
Yeah.
a gross story?
Sure.
So one of my sisters is a registered nurse.
Mhm.
And when she was in her training, she was working in the ICU, and a woman came in with untreated diabetes, and she left it so untreated. I'm not sure if it was type 1 or type 2. I believe it was type 2. Just untreated. It was really got so bad that she got an infection in her leg. And it was like in her thigh, and literally her skin was like melting away. Like
Yeah,
they had to
it's really bad.
amputate her because it was like chunks of like they could like just pull chunks of her leg out. It was
That's
my tongue feels like chalky just from that description.
An interesting thing that a lot of people don't make the connection about is that people who do low carbohydrate diets,
Mhm.
especially the ones who go to like very very low carb, they are actually trying to trigger the same response that diabetics have to, because they are trying to make it so that their ketone levels in their urine and body raise up. Because essentially, when you're on a low carb diet, you're very very close to what a diabetic diet is supposed to be. You're cutting out sugars,
Mhm.
you're cutting out breads and other processed carbohydrates, and people actually test their urine for their ketones to know that they are on the right track, and so that's how they lose weight. The same way that these people with type 1 diabetes will be underweight
Mhm.
is it's the same process, except people are trying to just kickstart it themselves in their own body. That's why there's people are really of two minds about whether this is like long term healthy diet to be
Yeah, or whether
going
it's like actually
after-
harmful.
because it can lead to the same complications.
That is rather scary in reality.
I think people just don't think about it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's also like when you were just discussing, and I know it's more pop culture of me to be leaning towards this, but I remember, did you guys see the film Panic Room?
yeah.
Because Panic Room with
Oh, that was
with
Jodie Foster,
Jodie Foster
and Kristen Stewart.
Yeah, and I think Jared Leto's in it, and
Yes.
and
Does he play one of the robbers?
yeah.
How old is
But
Jared Leto?
but like in that film, Kristen Stewart, and it's a bit of a spoiler, but it like adds a ticking clock component. Is she's type 1 diabetes,
Right.
Or she has type 1 diabetes, and so she needs an insulin shot because one of apparently, as I did like the slightest amount of just Googling right now, the distinctions as far as names, or they were formally known, was type 1 was juvenile diabetes or insulin dependent diabetes, whereas type 2 is adult onset and non-insulin dependent diabetes.
Yeah, like some people with type 2 will have to take insulin, and then some people, like if they can just regulate their diet, they'll be okay.
Right, which is pretty remarkable that in the case of type 1 it is such a stringent, like, no, you can't really regulate it, but
Right.
like obviously there are some things you can do to sort of mitigate these or running the risk of it. But all right, to get into sorting, because we spent quite a bit of time on diabetes, how are we feeling about this one?
This one affects children. It's
Mhm.
onset in childhood, which is a difference between the ones that we've already sorted that usually end up like starting in like prepubescence.
Mhm.
This one can start as early as like, like 9, 10, 11.
Mm-hmm.
This one is definitely so far like the one that like especially for children can be very very serious really quickly if
Sure.
untreated. And then let's see, I feel like it might have a little bit more name recognition in the general consensus than some of the other ones,
Mhm.
at least
Yeah.
until recently.
It's got moderate clout to it.
Yeah, and I don't, because I don't know if my bias is just that I've known about diabetes since I was a child, but I feel like it was the one that like at least
It's in the common vernacular for sure.
my friends at school would know the name of the disease, but they wouldn't necessarily know what caused it or anything like that.
Right.
Like I remember somebody asking me like if your grandma kisses you, can she transfer you the diabetes to you? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And I went, I was like, Grandma, is it okay if you give me a kiss on the cheek? And she's like, why? Yeah, you're dumb. Get out of here.
I'm sort of leaning towards Hufflepuff.
Yeah. Why do you say that?
Well, where were you leaning? I'll explain my logic in a moment. Or did you necessarily have a
This one feels like a Hufflepuff's like nightmare because it really cuts down the kind of foods that a Hufflepuff's gonna.
That is the exact reason
that
I've sort of gravitated towards it. I feel sometimes the very house that they'd be sorted into is like plays on the like polar opposites of or like plays against the values that they currently have. So the sort of Hufflepuff being the larder-based house seems like this would be a direct like challenge to them. And I don't necessarily feel that the attributes of any of the other houses are reflected as much as type 1 diabetes, but that again might just be me having also like previously been like, I'm trying to find a Hufflepuff. So
yeah. And that's not how you're supposed to conduct science. You shouldn't be you shouldn't be looking for results based off of your hypothesis. You should be lay out a hypothesis and let the results be what they may.
Yeah. Now I'm doing what they did with the Vanic manuscript, I believe it was.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you know about that, right? That
what Vanic? What?
I think it's the Vanic manuscript. Maybe that's not what it's called, but it's this manuscript that is written in a language that nobody has been able to determine from like the 15th century.
That really old book.
Yes. Okay. And like the only thing that they really have so they like ran it through. They've had like cryptographers run stuff on it. They've had all these people who are just like, you know, the Dan Browns or like of the like real world, and they most
like code breakers like everywhere.
Most recently ran it through a they ran it through like an AI, and it like was a situation where they were like, oh, we totally have it, and then they were like, oh no, wait, we don't in any Voynich manuscript.
Gotcha.
The Voynich manuscript, and they like ran it through an AI system, but the information that they had sort of run through it was modern languages, but this is 15th century.
Right.
So grammar and just basic etymology of words has changed. And also there's the idea that some of the words in the Voynich manuscript are actually anagrams. And they're, but if you're putting in like Hebrew, for example, Hebrew is a language that uses its consonants and then vowels are input afterwards under or like around the letters.
Yeah.
So if it's an anagram, you can scramble upon a scramble and just like make it adhere. So I'm sorry if I Voynich manuscripted that a little bit, but I still think that it's a Hufflepuff.
Honestly, that book could also just be gibberish. I feel like
it could be somebody like practicing their letters.
I mean, it certainly could. Also, if you guys want more on this sort of like occultish stuff, we did an episode that Reed was not actually a part of with Jared Rosen, but it was very fun on a bunch of sort of texts and vampire literature and things like that. So check that out. I forget what episode it is, but check it out.
Great.
Listen to that Apocrypha stuff. Anyway, back to type 1 diabetes.
Well, what are you thinking, Nikki?
I'm going to go with Hufflepuff too. And part of it has to do with like, it's like, it doesn't, it's a pretty simple fix. I mean, it's like there's such a simplicity to Hufflepuff, and I feel like type 1 diabetes as an autoimmune disease is a fairly simple.
Just in the fact, like, you get insulin and you're like relatively okay.
Yeah, you just need some insulin. I mean, and like pay attention, but
it's not there's not a cure, but it's treatable,
right?
In a much more straightforward way.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's wild, like with a lot of what people don't realize about a lot of these autoimmune diseases is there's not really a known cause. Like we still don't know exactly what causes diabetes to affect the pancreas. We just know that it does.
Also, and while we're just here, I think that like IBD, ulcerative colitis, and Crohn's disease probably fall into Hufflepuff as well, based on the fact that they're so diet based. But we're not specifically sitting down to sort that one based on the fact that your knowledge base isn't there necessarily.
I would also say maybe type 1 diabetes like really affects especially like so many different parts of your body and very like specifically and so widespread that it kind of reminds me of how like Hufflepuff can sometimes be a catch-all house for everybody who just doesn't fit the very exact specifications of the other houses.
Yeah.
So I think that might help along with the sorting aspect.
Shall we move on to celiac disease?
Oh, you mean that thing that suddenly everybody in Silver Lake had diagnosed themselves with?
It's very weird.
In the last 3 years.
So celiac disease.
Yes.
That's why you have gluten-free bread in your grocery store now, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's talk up celiac. What's the deal with it?
Celiac, it's a gluten intolerance, essentially.
Oh, it's just that simple.
It's basically.
I'm sure it's probably a little bit more complicated. Let's see here.
It's. I mean,
this affects your. This is going to be targeting more in your small intestine. So, and I feel like you're usually getting like diarrhea, cramping, you're not able to absorb the nutrients as well as when you're in remission, and it also can affect and if children are affected, it can affect the way that their body develops. Like they might not be able to grow as quickly.
Yeah, you have these tiny little it looks like little hairs in your intestines, and in celiac, what happens is and gluten is it's just a protein. Gluten's just a protein. It's found in wheat, rye, barley, things like that. And essentially what your body does with celiac is it sees the gluten protein in your body, and for some reason, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't handle this. I'm gonna attack myself, and it attacks your intestines, and it destroys those little hairs that help move your food along. So that's why you get it's just it ends up destroying everything.
So it isn't a matter necessarily that it can't get those specific proteins. It's actually the protein causes the small intestine to just run amok and nothing gets grabbed because the hairs are all destroyed.
Yeah.
So that's triggered by the gluten proteins specifically is what.
Yeah. By the way, they're not actually hairs. They just sort of resemble.
I understand. I understand. They appear like hair. They are not in fact hair.
Yeah. So as far as treatment, there's just straight up you got to have a strict diet. And so that means cutting out, like you said, all of those things that have all of those oat families that have wheat, that have the gluten in it. And so it basically cuts it all bread for you, essentially.
Sure. This one strikes me just off the cuff as being a Slytherin based on the fact that it's got a pretty direct means of both ways to be treated and also what it means for your diet, in that you have to be a bit of a purist in your approach. You have to be cutting certain things out. And at the same time, not to say on the severity scale, but this one does seem like if you're able to identify it, you're able to act very decisively, which is something that I feel a Slytherin.
Yeah. Also, poop the poop going through an intestine reminds me of a basilisk. So
this isn't necessarily the condition's fault itself, but I do think it's been very Slytherin like, the way that producers of food have really leaned into the idea of convincing people that they have this condition without diagnosis.
Oh,
Like,
I see.
not necessarily even the food producers themselves, but like new age like body healers who like don't have really any like actual background in medicine, telling people not to eat these foods.
Okay. That is very true. But there also are a lot of studies, like people are, like scientists and doctors are doing a lot more research into like how this stuff does affect our body. And you know what? There is a small modicum of truth to the fact that gluten is, it's non-anti-inflammatory. In the car, we can talk about diet. Actually, this is a great time to talk about diet real quick.
Yeah.
With people with autoimmune diseases, diet does play a huge factor in it. And even without autoimmune diseases, what you're putting into your body makes a huge difference. I was just reading this article about Tom Brady and about how Tom Brady has an anti-inflammatory diet. Now, he doesn't have an autoimmune disease. He's a very healthy man. But part of it is the fact that he makes sure that the things that he's putting in his body aren't going to inflame his body. So he doesn't have things like nightshades, which is, he has very minimal tomato, eggplant, like not a lot of that, like tomato, eggplant, chili, potatoes,
right?
Or like even funguses like mushrooms. He tries not to consume those because those can lead to inflammation in your body, or at the very least aren't anti-inflammatory like certain other things you can put in your body.
That being said, though, it is important to note that potatoes do not have gluten.
They do not have gluten. That is very true.
So, like, you can conceivably eat potatoes on a gluten-free diet.
Yes. And
you can also,
I do.
You can also eat corn, millet, sorghum, rice, quinoa, which suddenly came along around the time it seemed people were going low carb. Quinoa was like, I'm here, eat me instead of all of your other grains.
How do you feel as far as the Slytherin house sorting goes for celiac?
I think also it can be triggered also by like stressors in your life, not necessarily like caused exactly by it, but I know like people who are under a lot of stress or like pregnancy can make those symptoms appear. So I think that also leans towards it being a Slytherin type thing. Yeah.
I wasn't sure if that was leading your argumentation in a different direction. But okay, we're sorted in Slytherin. Let's close out with psoriasis.
Oh yeah, what's psoriasis, Nikki?
Oh, that's when your body's like attacking your skin.
Yeah, it's mostly an external, as far as almost exclusively external.
Common misconception. It actually can infect your interior tissues as well.
Whoa.
Well,
when it gets
Michael, you don't look inside your body. How do you know what's going on in there?
I certainly don't know.
Yeah. It's like different levels. Like you can have somebody with just like a patch of psoriasis. Like, I know somebody, a working actor in Hollywood.
Wow, can you introduce me?
No, she has like just a patch of psoriasis on her knee. But then like a friend of mine, she had psoriasis all inside of her body as well. Like she would get it all over her face and all over her body, like just like patches of like red, flaky, dry, painful skin. But then it affected her joints as well, where like inside her body, she was developing like her tissues were just like destroyed. And it was because she did not take care of herself at all. She, consumed a lot of alcohol and drugs. So her body was constantly under attack.
So going off of what you previously said, diet is something that directly seems to affect psoriasis then?
Yeah. I mean, really any autoimmune disease, you can do a lot of the work of like managing your symptoms comes from what you're putting inside of your body.
Also, some other it can also be if you are affected by it, it can also be onset bouts of it with like psychological stress.
Yes.
And if you suffer from psoriasis, it's also you have higher risk of suffering from arthritis, lymphomas, cardiovascular disease, Crohn's, and even depression can be like tightly linked to psoriasis.
So psoriasis can be the beginning of a lot more. So it's if you do suffer from psoriasis, then I'd encourage you to definitely be proactive in how you're dealing with it.
It also has that mystery factor, which probably makes it more of a Gryffindor or Slytherin, because like type 1 diabetes, there's no known cause.
Mm-hmm. I'm definitely feeling that it seems more of a Gryffindor than a Slytherin, just based on the fact that it is being so bold as to sort of present itself externally, as opposed to other of our autoimmune diseases listed so far, which can sort of dwell within and be, unfettered by your like own self realizing exactly what it is. Psoriasis is like, nope, I'm here. Get wrecked.
Another interesting thing to like the how is this being caused factor, which is like they still haven't been able to pinpoint it, but it's kind of helped them understand more of like, is this environmental or is this genetic? Is that if they study twins, because that's usually a good way to try to like have a
twin
control
studies
group.
Are always like anytime that a scientist is like, I got twins, is just like them being like, I won guys, everything's gonna be great, we have the reason
that the researchers strongly believe that there has to be some sort of genetic cause is because if one twin has the condition in utero, there's a 70% chance that an identical twin will also have it. Whereas non-identical twins, the risk is 20%.
Huh.
So that's something to put out there.
That's pretty extreme differential there.
So I would say if there is genetic exclusivity towards it, I would lean Slytherin.
Oh. I'm still feeling, however, that based on its external, like I think if it were not exhibiting any external anything, that it would probably I'd be more inclined to say that it's Slytherin, but based on the fact that it is like, I think it would deem itself more crafty in my book if we weren't seeing any sort of physical rashes. And even in the case of Slytherins who did have external sort of display, like the dark mark, it required a spell to reveal itself, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And psoriasis is very out in the open. Usually if you can see it on the skin, it's happening on the inside too.
Gotcha.
So is it a case where psoriasis actually starts internally and works its way out, or?
Well, I mean, that's everything.
I mean, just like, I'm just saying, like, is the, like, in some cases, like a rash might be the beginning of something else, or is it the reverse? Like is it like if you're suffering, is it like that it's first going to get really bad internally and then start to show itself on the external?
I think it's the opposite. I think typically it starts with the skin. Like
that's that was what I was checking.
Gotcha.
It's definitely outward first, I would say.
Okay. Well, we don't necessarily need to land on a general consensus. Where are you feeling, however, Nikki?
I would say that aspect of it does make me think Gryffindor more, of just like, look at me, I'm psoriasis.
Yeah.
How cool am I? Like, I feel like
it's definitely not. It's harder to say that this is like one of those like silent or like invisible disabilities, because
it's not.
The common treatment is like a topical cream, right?
Yeah, like a steroid cream, essentially.
Yeah, I see a lot of ads for psoriasis, like, various creams and medications. I feel like psoriasis is not to say like psoriasis is in vogue within the pharmaceutical community, but I feel like it in recent years has gotten like an uptick as far as just notoriety is concerned.
Well, yeah, I think that's fair.
Oh.
And with that, I'd like to thank Nicky Urban for joining us to help sort autoimmune diseases. If we want to be finding more of you about the internet, where might we look?
You can catch me on Twitter at tweets at toilets. I tweet a lot about pooping. I love pooping. So if you're into pooping, join me.
Where's the poop people?
That's me in a minute.
Oh gosh. Let's get you off the mic for this.
Tweets at toilets on Twitter, Instagram at Urban Nicky. Catch me on YouTube.
Yeah,
Fembot PhD.
Look up their videos. They are an amazing group, and I'm very lucky to be able to perform with Nicky also. Yeah. So
if you'd like to be seeing more from Reed Brice, you can follow them at That Dang Dingus. You can follow me at Belated Media. You can follow the Sorting Hat at sortinghat_pod, where we do Twitter polls and other little banter with you lovely individuals. We'd always love for you guys to leave us a review on iTunes. And hey, also we're on Spotify now, so you can listen to us there. So thanks again so much for listening to this autoimmune disease-based episode. We'll catch you later.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.